ever since the Supreme Court case a few months ago that really had nothing to do with Glock. It really revolved around the concept of ghost guns. But a lot of the verbiage that's coming out of that case really, and I brought it up back then, that it threatens companies like Glock, who are not really doing anything wrong as a company, but other people manufacture aftermarket parts that then fit on really easy, like the Glock switch. And they're going to hold Glock accountable for that thing if they don't make any changes. And I've talked about that a couple times in the last month, that I think this is really kind of the end of the modern Glock pistol, that they are going to have to change their design to not take the Glock switch. Now, I'm not an engineer, and I wouldn't think that would be too awfully hard. And this is a regular practice. And I kind of want to just speak to this real quick, but that's not what this video is about. What this video is about is 2 states have now filed suit against Glock for this exact reason, and it is going to be devastating for Glock in my prediction, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. But ultimately, what this really revolves around is this idea that if you know that somebody in a few seconds to a few minutes can modify your gun with an aftermarket part, that you are obligated to change that thing in the eyes of the courts. And I kind of want to give an example of this, and this is an example I gave, and just a strange backstory, but when I was out of college, first out of college, I was a tobacco analyst. I was a scientific analyst for the tobacco companies before I was a science teacher. And ultimately what that looked like was I would go through the research, mostly for Philip Morris, and I would assign that to certain cases. And this was back in 1999, 2000, when there was all those lawsuits on the tobacco companies. And one particular aspect of that was people were falling asleep with their cigarettes and they'd burn their houses down. And there was a lot of lawsuits revolving around that. And they had proven that these tobacco companies knew that their papers wouldn't go out because they want you to burn that cigarette down so you smoke more cigarettes. And if they weren't going to change that they were then liable, and they knew they'd be liable, and they wisely changed it to banded rolling paper, which goes out if you quit smoking it, and that's what you're dealing with today. Glock has not done that. Glock has to do that because they have to recognize that now the courts are saying, well, they were hinting at, but now they're officially saying, they were hinting at this idea that because you know it can do this thing, that now you are liable for any damage that's done from that Glock switch. And it will work in court. I mean, back then there were lawsuits that really revolved around, tens of billions of dollars. Today, you're probably talking hundreds of billions of dollars in state lawsuits. So, well, what are these lawsuits? Well, now what we have is we have New Jersey and Minnesota just 2 weeks ago filing suit against Glock specifically because they are knowingly, according to the court documents, they are knowingly continuing to manufacture this pistol with full knowledge that you can take this Glock switch, put it in it, and really do whatever, have a fully automatic pistol at that point. But their lawsuit revolves around the deaths in those states are Glock's fault, is how they're looking at it. Those are Glock's faults. And now they're suing Glock on behalf of any death or any injury in those states that has played out is going to be, in the eyes of the court, Glock's fault, most likely. I mean, because I've seen this play out in other industry. And as a matter of fact, Philip Morris warned the rest of the industries that this kind of thing was going to happen. They were saying, fast food's next, then the gun industry. Like, they laid it all out for us. And here we are staring at it. And it's playing out with Glock. And I believe in 2025, we're going to be looking at lawsuits from Minnesota and New Jersey. I'm going to predict nearing $100 billion each lawsuit. It's going to be so much that it would be really almost impossible for Glock to stay in business in the United States. I remember an economical cartoon back in 2000 when Florida was suing Philip Morris. and they were suing them for $25 billion. This is back in 2000. And the cartoon essentially had the state of Florida with a big axe in it holding Philip Morris down like a goose, getting ready to chop off its head, and all the other states standing behind Florida saying, no, stop, don't kill it. So it's potentially killing an industry. It can potentially kill that company altogether based on what those lawsuits are and how they play out. And I think best case scenario for Glock in 2025 is that they modify their pistols. That way they can at least say, hey, we tried. That's their best case scenario. And I'm going to also say, if you have a Glock, I recommend you hang on to it, because I think they're going to have to change them in 2025. I don't think the modern Glock pistol in a new version is going to exist by the end of 2025 for sure. I believe these lawsuits are going to be in the tens of billions for sure, maybe nearing $100 billion each state, blaming Glock for any death that took place based off of those Glock switches, saying that they absolutely knew that that was a possibility. And I mean, I've been saying I know it's a possibility for the last several months. The Supreme Court said that it was a possibility a few months ago. I mean, they didn't, you just got to look at the verbiage from that case. I did a video on that. I don't want to get too deep into that because we're going to go off on a whole other tangent, but it really revolved around this idea that anything that's modifiable is liable, essentially, like a ghost gun, for example. So there you go. That's my prediction. I think they're going to lose these cases. I think they're going to have to settle them for some reason. I don't know if it'll actually go all the way to a verdict. Maybe it will. I definitely don't think it's getting thrown out. I'm sure they'll appeal it. It's a hot mess for Glock, and the best case scenario for them is to just make that modification. Again, I'm not an engineer. I just change it slightly to where you still get your same, you get the same Glock pistol, but with a slight change. And the last example I'm going to give is when the Ruger Blackhawk, if you look at, anything made before the mid 70s on the Ruger Blackhawks, they had 3 screws on the side, and they referred to them as a 3-screw. But the problem with that firearm was kind of like the Colt's single action armies, is if you had a bullet in the chamber and something struck that hammer, you dropped your gun or something, it would fire. And I believe there was one particular case that changed everything, where a man had a gun on his truck, and a Ruger Blackhawk, and he hit the brakes and it went down the floorboard, struck the floorboard, and went up and shot him. And that was kind of that final straw. And they had to modify the Ruger Blackhawk. They just simply had to, because they knew that it would do that. And that's the basis of this. You're going to have to change it. And if you've ever pulled back the hammer action on a 3-screw Ruger Blackhawk versus a 2-screw, it's nice that's 3-screw. That's always the Ruger Blackhawk I'm after, is the older ones with the 3 screws. And I think that's going to be the same with the Glocks. There's going to be like a pre-2025 Glock and a post-2025 Glock. So hang on to your Glocks. These are my predictions. We'll see how the court cases play out, but I think it's going to be brutal, is my prediction. Any thoughts or insights you might have on that, definitely put it below. Do want to take a moment and say, most people watch the channel, hey, they're not subscribers. Click that subscribe button. Greatly increases the algorithm and our ability to get these messages out. That link is also below. But the most important part of this channel, we take prayer requests. So please don't ever hesitate to send that in. Thank you for watching this episode of God, Family, and Guns. And as always, love God, love your family, love guns.